Let me ask a question. Just to be, warts and all, is the TARP program working? Has it in fact achieved the ends for which it was designed?
I think that really depends on what your definition of working is. I think that the goals of the TARP have changed over time. Different folks have different definitions of what's working and what's not working. I think if the goal was to remove $700 billion of toxic assets off the books of financial institutions, that clearly has not happened. If the goal is to increase lending, I think that too, unfortunately, has not happened. If the goal was to avoid a complete systematic collapse of the financial industry, that may very well have happened. I think that, it's impossible to look in the crystal ball and know exactly what would have happened absent the TARP. But from what we've seen, from what financial institutions have told us, we were on the precipice of a potential total collapse, and shoring up the capital may have indeed achieved that goal if that was a goal.
Yeah. I haven't been a big fan of TARP either, but I think you have to give credit where credit is due. I voted against the release of the second tranche, which was the only vote I got to have as a new member of Congress on TARP, because I didn't feel that the accountability and transparency standards were in place. The House, in fact, had a statutory framework to allow that, but the Senate didn't agree to it. But having said that, we were facing a systematic financial meltdown last September, were we not?
That is certainly what, in the conducting of our audits and gathering of information, that is an opinion we've heard many times from the top regulators as well as members of the industry.
And while the flow of credit may still be impeded, the fact of the matter is stability in the financial system, the stress test on 19 banks, for example, would seem to suggest that some stability has returned to the system that was lacking as recently as last fall.
I think we're certainly in a much different situation we were at last fall, and it may very well be that the TARP is responsible for that, or responsible in part. Again, part of the reason why we do Section 3 and we talk about all these programs is so that you can have in one place all of the different supports that were out there and that have been in place, and of which the TARP is only a small part.
Right.
So it's hard to, I think GAO has pointed this out, it's hard to say specifically whether the effect is from the TARP or from a different program.
But it might be fair to say that had we not had some intervention of some magnitude, such as TARP, we might have actually faced a much more serious situation.
That is certainly the opinion of the people that we've spoken to who were there at the time, including Chairman Bernanke and former Secretary Paulson.
Let me ask, $300 billion in TARP funding was invested directly in systematically important firms through the Capital Purchase Program, the Target Investment Program, and the Systematically Significant Failing Institutions Program. The Bush administration pretty much opposed giving the Federal Government a voting stake in banks in which the Federal Government made equity injections. Do you think oversight and accountability capabilities might have been improved if we had not resisted that?
I'm sorry, I just missed the last part of your question.
I said the Bush administration, in making those funds available through those programs, opposed giving the Federal Government a voting stake in banks in which it made equity injections. Did we make a mistake in that respect? Could oversight and accountability have been improved, in fact, if we had a voting stake in those banks?
I think oversight and accountability certainly would have been improved if there were more conditions that were in place and if there were oversight triggering mechanisms that accompanied those conditions. There were very, very few conditions put on the initial output of funds. Whether that particular condition, I think that's a policy decision that increased transparency as we look and see what's happened, as we report, hopefully, and convince Treasury to give us an accounting on the use of funds. I think we can be in a better position to make that evaluation and by looking exactly what has happened. And that's why we push for transparency, so that you, the members of Congress, could make those determinations. You have all the information available to look back and say, hey, next time that we're in a bailout, what worked, what didn't work, what was the impact of the various decisions?
Well, let me give you an example. The Bank of America, which is now attempting to back out of the Federal Reserve's ring fencing arrangement. If we had insisted, as part of the $118 billion we pumped into BOA, that one of the tools would be to have a voting stake in BOA in return for that, would that be helpful from an oversight and accountability point of view from your perspective today?
It certainly would have an impact on the decision-making process, and that. I'm not sure if voting in particular, from our perspective, from SIGTARP's perspective, what difference that would make, although it certainly would make a difference from Treasury's perspective and their ability to control the actions of these financial institutions.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.